Hey everybody, this is Captain Chemo, and this is my very first video tutorial for Captain Chemo members. And in this video I am going to cover how I process this photo. Now this is just on the processing of this image. I wanted to do a video on capturing the photo and going over camera settings and stuff like that, but I've decided not to. I'll do that in a later time. I wanted to get this video out by the end of this month. And with that said, let's go over what we're going to do here. I'm going to show you the exposures that we're going to use. We're going to use 4 exposures. This is the first one. The first 3 exposure that we're going to use is for the moon only, and we're going to take those 3 exposures and tone map it in Photomatix Pro. So we're going to take this exposure. This is the even exposure. This is the under exposure, and we're going to use this for the detail here in the moon. And this is the overexposure, and we're going to use this exposure for the colors in the clouds. So we're going to use these 3 exposures here to create this one exposure in Photomatix. And once we get this exposure, we're going to merge it with another exposure, and that would be this exposure, which is evenly lit. And we're going to take that, we're going to merge it with the tone mapped image to get this image. So we're going to bring them all together to get this image right here, these 2 exposures, to get this one exposure right here. Now once we get this exposure, we're going to save this as a PSD file, and we're going to take this into Photomatix and we're going to tone map it. And when we tone map it, we're going to get this image. It's a little intense, but we're going to take this image and merge it back in with that image, and we're going to do that just for the color only, so we'll give it a little bit more of a pop, and what we'll get is we'll get this photo. Now once we get here, I'm going to show you how to do the merging and all that stuff in Photoshop Elements, and then we're going to take it into Lightroom and we're going to get this photo, which is our final image. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, I have my Photomatix Pro window open, and the first thing we're going to do is tone map our 3 exposures for the moon. So I'm going to drag and drop that right into the Photomatix window. I'm going to go ahead and click OK for this, and click OK, and then let's see here, no need to worry about that, no need to worry about that. We'll want to reduce noise, and we won't need to worry about chromatic aberration. So go ahead and click OK. Okay, so we have our tone mapping window open here, and we're going to start tone mapping. I'm going to go straight to my default, and we're going to start tone mapping right from there. And all we have to worry about is the moon, because that's really what we'll be doing, is just focusing on this area here. So let me go ahead and close out my preset window and then make this a little bigger, and then we can start tone mapping for this area. Let me move this to the side a little bit, just kind of so we can see the moon, get a little better view of the moon. So first we're going to start out with strength. I'm going to move the strength slider all the way up to 100, and what this does is give me better definition in the moon, the crater. Next I'm going to move color saturation to 60. This will just give me a little bit more color here. And then we're going to move to luminosity and detail contrast. Luminosity will brighten up the image a little bit, so I'm going to bring that all the way up to 10. And then detail contrast, this adds just more definition in the moon there, the craters is what I'm looking for. And lighting adjustment, I'm going to boost that all the way up to 10. And next we'll go down to the next batch of sliders here. Let's move it down. We'll start with smooth highlights. Actually, we're going to leave smooth highlights alone because it's not really going to do anything for this image. If I move it up, you'll see that it's just bringing out the foreground here. So we'll just bring it back and leave that alone, because I don't really care about too much about the foreground. All I'm working on is the moon. Okay, the next slider is white point. I'm going to bring that down because we're really just not worried about anything in the bright areas. So by bringing it down, it brings down the moon, or just the illumination on the moon, and that's what I'm going for here, is just to get it as dark as possible but still get some of the lights around the clouds. Alright, now I'm going to bring the gamma up a little bit. This is so that it matches the the other photo when we blend it together in Photoshop. So I'm going to bring this all up a little bit to about a 0.65. Next is temperature, and I'm going to want to add just a little more warmth to the image. The photo's already a little warm, but by adding some more warmth it gives it a little bit more of a mood. Alright, so now we're going to go down to the next batch of sliders, the advanced option, and we're going to start with micro smoothing. Now if you smooth out the image using micro smoothing, you go all the way here to the right, it'll brighten up the image, and we do want it a tad bit brighter, but then you lose contrast, so I don't want to lose any contrast, so I'm going to bring it all the way to the left to a 0. Okay, so our moon actually looks really good right there, and this should work for our photo. What we're going to do now is just go ahead and hit process, and then we're going to go straight into Photoshop Elements, and I'll show you how to blend the two together. Okay, so we're in Photoshop Elements now, and I have two exposures open. We have the original exposure here, and we have the HDR exposure, which we tone map just for the moon here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this. So I do you can go in, just do Control or Command A for all, and then just go ahead and copy it and then paste it into this picture, and then you should create a new layer here down in the bottom. And if you click the eyeball tool, you'll notice that our original layer is right on the bottom right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click the eyeball tool back on. Now I'm going to add a little layer mask to the photo, and I will click Control I. It's Command I on a Mac, and what that does is inverts the mask, making it completely black, or making the layer here invisible so you can see the layer below it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the paintbrush tool, and we're going to start painting in white. 20% is good, and let's make the paintbrush a little smaller, and just start painting. Make sure though that you have your layer mask selected so you don't start painting over the actual photo, and just start painting in the area right around here. Now start expanding it a little bit to the outside to kind of, actually I'm going to drop it down to 10% so I get a better transition or a blend, and just start blending it in and go out to the outer edges a little bit, and then I'll just paint in here. And what I'm going to do is increase it to 100, where I just want to make sure that I get all the detail here in the moon, and just paint in this area of the moon. And then let's go ahead and go back to black. So I'm going to switch my color here. I'm going to go back to black, and then go back to about 10%. I'm going to actually zoom in here so you can see a little better. Right around here it's a little orange, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it in a little bit so it's not so obvious or so bright. And that looks okay, and that looks pretty good. So if I were to click the eyeball here, you'll see the moon is not there, and I click the eyeball back on, it looks good. Next we're going to save this image, so save it as a Photoshop file. So we're going to save it as a Photoshop file, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take that Photoshop file and we're going to tone map it in Photomatix. So let's go ahead and go into Photomatix now and tone map this photo. Okay, so we're back in Photomatix Pro, and I'm going to drag and drop that Photoshop file we just did. I'm going to drag and drop it right into the Photomatix window, and we're going to hit the tone mapping option. And when we have our tone mapping window open, let's go ahead and click the default or the enhancer default preset, and we're just going to use that photo. We don't need to do any extra processing. I'll go ahead and just click process here and go ahead and save this photo. So I'm going to save it into my directory here, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to take this photo and bring it and open this photo and the PSD file, and we're going to merge them together. So let's go back into Photoshop Elements. Okay, so I am back in Photoshop Elements, and I have the original exposure with the moon in it. This is the PDS file that we tone mapped, and I have the tone map version of that PDS file. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy this tone map version, and we're going to paste it into the original version there. So Control Alt again, or Command A, and copy it, and then we're just going to paste it right into the window here. And now I'm going to change the transparency mode here. I'm going to change it to overlay, and then to about 30%, and then you can see how we get just a little bit more of a pop there. Okay, so next I'm going to create a composite layer of these 3 layers. Let me go ahead and close this window out a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control Shift Alt E. On a Mac it's Command Shift Alt E, and make sure you have the top layer here selected, and click those 4 buttons, and it merges all 3 of these layers here together to create one layer up here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into quick mode, and I'm going to bring out, let me go ahead and close this. I'm going to bring out my shadow here just to bring out the dark areas of the image a little bit. And then we'll go back to full mode, and you can see it's a little brighter. And we'll play around with the opacity a little bit just to kind of bring it back. I think about 65 should work. Let's see. Actually 55 seems better, so we'll leave it at 55. Okay, so our moonshot here is starting to look pretty good. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a levels adjustment layer here. So we'll go down to the bottom with the levels options right down here and click on levels, and it'll create a levels layer here. And what we're going to do is we're going to darken this darken it a little bit. And the idea behind this is right around here is where I want it darker, around the lighthouse. So I'll just play with it a little bit until I get it just right. And now I'm going to invert this mask down here, and then go into the paintbrush tool here, or the paintbrush tool, and go to white and go into about 20%, and start painting in the area here and making it darker. And that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. Just makes it just a little darker, and I'm gonna go ahead and actually bring it up to 100% and really just make that lighthouse really dark. And now let's go ahead and adjust the click on your levels layer here and just make some extra adjustments. I'm going to probably want it just a little darker. And now I'm just going to go back and paint a little bit more. Just change my brush here, just darken it up a little bit. Alright, so I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and check it out. This is before, and this is after with our levels adjustment. Okay, so next we're going to create a composite layer. So let me close this out, and that is done with the Control Shift Alt E. On a Mac it's Command Shift Option E, and it'll take all of the layers here and create a composite out of all those layers. And what I'm going to do is I am going to go into the filters and add a topaz denoise. Okay, so for topaz denoise, I'm just going to use the JPEG strong preset and hit OK. And what this does is it smooths out the image a little bit, gives it less noise. This was shot in the dark, so you can see here the noise, and it'll smoothen it out just a little bit. Okay, so next I am going to duplicate this layer here, and I am going to do a Control T, Command T on Mac to transform the image a little bit, to crop it and to straighten out the image a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now that I have my photo straightened out, you can see here this is the before and this is the after. I am going to duplicate this layer here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth out the water here. If you notice, it looks smooth, but it's a little rough. I want it a little smoother, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer, and then we're going to go into the filter, blur, and the motion blur, and we're gonna just basically our 999 pixel blur, and make sure your angle's straight, and hit OK. Okay, so we have our blur, but we don't want to blur the entire image, so we're gonna add a layer mask, and we're gonna use the gradient tool here. Make sure you're on the linear gradient, and apply that onto the layer mask so that it only affects just the water, and that's what we're trying to do, is blur the water. Now with that said, I'm gonna just bring down my opacity a little bit, just enough to kind of give it a good blur but not make it look too obvious. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the paintbrush tool and make sure it's on a black color, and use the paintbrush, and I'm going to make that just a little smaller, and then we're going to go ahead and go straight to 100 here, just so we can see it a little better. And we're just going to start painting this area here, because there's a pole here that we want not blurred. So I'm going to paint that, and then I'm going to paint it back in white here. I'm going to go back to 20%, and I'm just going to start painting that in so it looks a little better here. I'm going to go up to 50% here, and just now I'm going to go to 20%, and then I'm just going to paint around the area here. So let me zoom out here, and that looks pretty good. I'm not going to spend too much time being perfect. What I want to do is go back to black. I'm going to go to 10%, and I'm just going to paint the top edges here to kind of reveal reveal back the original water, and just keep the foreground blurred out. Alright, so I think that looks pretty good. I click the eyeball tool, here is the before and here's the after. Next we're going to duplicate this top layer here, the blur, and we're gonna give the water a little more contrast. So we're gonna duplicate this layer. You can do that with Control J or Command J on a Mac, and click on the transparency mode on that duplicate blurred layer and change it to color dodge, and that will give it a little more of a pop. You're going to want to probably play around with the opacity to see where you want the extra contrast and the extra colors to settle in at, and I like it full on 100, so we're going to leave it there at 100. Alright, so this was before, now this is after. Okay, the photo looks good, and we're pretty much done here using Photoshop Elements. Now we're going to take this photo into Lightroom and then finish the post-processing, adjusting color and adding contrast to the image to make it look even nicer. Okay, so I am in Lightroom now. I have the Develop module open, and I have our lighthouse photo. And we're just going to do a little post-processing to it. We're not going to do a whole lot. The photo looks pretty good right now, so what I'm just going to do is just add a little bit of vignette just to draw the eye towards the center a little bit, and then maybe some adjustments in the temperature just a little bit, maybe give it a little more of a cast to it, setting a mood to the photo, and just play around with the exposure a little bit here. Recovery light, bring up the fill a little, and just add a little more black into the image. Add a tad bit of contrast, and then maybe bump up the clarity a little bit. And let's see, it looks pretty good now, so let's see the before and then the after. So I think that looks pretty good for this photo. So I mean, if you want, you can play around with it until you like it, but it looks good to me right here. So that's it for this tutorial. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up this tutorial by going over what we just did. We took these 3 exposures of the moon to create this photo in Photomatix, and then we took that moon and merged it with this photo in Photoshop Elements to create this image, a nice composite of the foreground of the lighthouse and the moon together. And we took that, we tone mapped it in Photomatix to get a little more color, and we blended it in together in Photoshop Elements. We blended in these 2 photos here to create this image, and then we just took it into Lightroom and we created this image. Okay, so that does it for this tutorial. So hopefully I'll have another tutorial ready for next month. If I do, you'll get another email from me. So until then, this is Captain Chemo signing out.